When you have prepaid rent, you're going to initiate it out of your cash account, which is your asset account that does any general cash transactions, money, right? So you would take your money out of cash, and then you would debit it. You would credit cash, and you would debit it into prepaid rent. I'm going to go ahead and put $400 here, just for prepaid rent, just cause. And that's how you initiate or start the prepaid rent.
Make it 1,200.
1,200?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go ahead and change the mind and go to 1,200. Now, this is how you initiate the actual account, and it's going to be the same thing, an asset account, which is debit increase, credit decrease. Now, this would be what you always do at the every beginning of the month. Now, when you start using up your prepaid rent, you're basically going to start decreasing it and actually turning it into an expense, which would be a specific expense, which is rent expense. So this one will be for the first 3 months. It'll be what, 300? For the first 4 months, it'll be $300 each. So we're going to go ahead and decrease. It'll be at the end of the month. You got your rent bill, right?
Debit first.
Yes, debit first. We'll go debit first, of course. Yes. So you got the bill at the end of the month, January 30th, right? We got it today. So we're going to pay it for tomorrow. So what we're going to do is we're going to show that we're going to do, what was it, $300 debited to rent expense, and you're going to credit out of your prepaid rent because that's where you have your money that's solely for your rent, for the building that you're using for your business, right? And then you just do the small math here, and it'd be, what is it?
900.
900? Hey, I'm not good at math, okay? I'm just good at numbers, okay? But I'm not good at math. And then that's how you would show it for the prepaid rent. And now usually when the book is talking about prepaid rent, it usually says rent expired or rent is due and you paid it off with this amount. And they'll give you the amount that you have to pay for, right? So that's prepaid rent. Now the next one that we go over is art supplies. Now art supplies, you all kind of get confused with it with with equipment. Now equipment deals with a historical value number, which I'm gonna kind of go back and forth between art supplies and equipment. So now equipment is a solid number. It's usually like you invest that much money, $10,000 in equipment. And now usually that number stays that number. You'll never touch that number for equipment. That's its historical value. That's what you started it out with. And now coming back to art supplies, where art supplies is actually usable. So what you do is you invest your money into that, whatever supplies it is. So for example, here we're going to do it like the book says it, where it's art supplies. So you're Bob Ross and you're going around doing painting trainings for everybody, right? So you're going to invest $400 in art supplies. So that's your debit in art supplies. That's how you start or initiate that account. So as over time, as you use it up at the end of this month of January, let's say we did a bunch of trainings and now we have to go over and look at our art supplies to see what we used up. And let's say we've already used up like $200 worth of paint, which is a part of our art supplies.
Debit.
So you would debit your art supplies expense by the amount that you've used up already. Because debit first, credit second, right? And then you would come and show that decrease of how much you used up of your art supplies from your asset account by that same amount. And then you would do your math, and it would be, I'm gonna go ahead and fix this to 200, right? And that would be your new number for the next month as you roll into the next month of February. And so art supplies will always be used up or decreased versus where equipment will be set as that one number, the historical value. Now the new account that connects with equipment would be accumulated depreciation, specifically to whatever account it is, like equipment. So what you all have to know about accumulated depreciation is that it's a contra asset account. And now what do I mean by a contra asset account? The contra asset account is basically the opposite of an asset account. Hence the contradicting, just to make that little connection. And what the normal balance for accumulated depreciation will be an increase in credit and a decrease in debit, which is the exact opposite of what an asset is, right? Contra asset. Now, the definition for accumulated depreciation is to show the devaluement of your equipment. Okay? So we had $10,000 initially in the beginning of January, right? So now it's the end of the month of January, and usually the book will tell you that you've already it'll give you a pre-calculated number of how much you've been devalued. But in reality, you have to actually, in real life, you actually have to do a calculation and show how much you need to devalue for every single time until it's no more, right? So for here, we're going to go ahead and just say that it was decreased by, I'll say $1,000. So we're going to go ahead and debit our depreciation expense by $1,000. And once you debit that depreciation, you're showing that devaluement of what you originally had. Now we're not going to touch our equipment account because that's our historical value. That's what you know. That's what you invested in the first time. So then you're going to credit your accumulated depreciation by that same amount, $1,000. And now I'm putting it in red as well for credit because you're showing that it's a devaluement. Even though it's increasing, you're still showing it that it's a devaluement. That's why I'm leaving it as a red, okay? That makes sense? Yes, it does make sense. So the red, what I'm going to show you what the red is here is that the red is basically showing money leaving that account and leaving the business. Does that make sense? Like, does my algorithm of colors make sense here so far?
Yeah.
Yes? No, maybe so? Tell me no.
The accumulated depreciation is going to be on the asset side?
Yes. Accumulated depreciation will always connect with whatever account it is.
Okay.
So for this one, this accumulated depreciation will be specific to equipment. So it'll say accumulated depreciation, and then it'll have like a comma, and it'll actually have a specific name to that. And usually, I think for the beginning of this chapter, it doesn't already have it underneath that account, but later on you'll have to have it always with that account. It'll always stick next to it. And it'll be the exact opposite of what your equipment is because it's a contra asset account. Because it's showing how much you devalued over time. Okay? That makes sense. No questions on accumulated depreciation? No?
So if we do, whatever we do to depreciate, we gotta do to accumulate then.
Correct.
So it's kind of like.
Correct. You're gonna have two of the same names, but accumulated depreciation will be your contra asset account, which will be always underneath your asset account, and that'll just basically be like a tally mark to show how much you've devalued your original number. And then this will just be showing how much you devalued it for that month. Okay? Now the final account that we were introduced to this week was salaries payable. And now salaries payable will be usually shown as accrued salaries, or you owe salaries but haven't paid them yet in the book. That's how they would say it to you. And usually when you see the word accrued, generally you're always going to think salaries payable because you owe those salaries to your employees. And you would debit however amount it was that you owed to your employees. Let's say it was $500, right? So you would record that as a debit to $500 as salaries expense, because anything that you have to pay or have to pay later will be considered an expense because you have to pay that off. Even though you didn't pay it off, you still have to show it as a credit to what you owe, or an increase to salaries payable for $500. Because you still owe that for later on. Okay? And now usually going back to equipment, when you see that, when they talk about devaluement, they'll actually tell you that this depreciated by this much. Yeah, I think that was pretty self-explanatory. It'll tell you that it depreciated by that much. So you'll know that you have to use cumulative depreciation and depreciation expense. I believe I've gone over everything that you all need to know for this. Any questions? Oh, one more thing. For art supplies, generally the book will say, we'll kind of talk about it in reverse. It'll say that you have $200 worth of art supplies on hand. And usually when they say on hand, that's showing how much they have right now. That's how much you have at the end of the month. So let's say they gave you a number of, let's say this was $4,000 instead. The art supplies was $4,000. So they'll say that $3,800 is on hand for your art supplies. So then what you have to do is you have to look at your original number, what you first started out with, which was $4,000, and you only have $3,800 on hand. So then you just have to do the math. Okay, well, what's the difference between 4,000 and 3,800? 200. So then what you have to do is record that in your adjustment as $200, debit it to art supplies expense, and then credit it to art supplies. Because they've already given you the final number for your just a trial balance. Yes? Makes sense.